to you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Yiqian Zhang. I am the Sustainable Mobility Officer at ICLEI World Secretariat based in Bonn, Germany. And together with my colleague Sina Zhen from the Sustainable Mobility team, we will be hosting the session for you today. So first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers, the Urban Freight Platform, the Northern Lead, University of Gothenburg, and the Chalmers University of Technology for having us here today. And it's a great pleasure to be part of the conference and of course to have the chance to engage with the network of urban freight researchers from all over the world. That being said, I hope the next hour will be a very interesting discussion on the intersections between research and practice in managing urban freight transport. So before we get started, just a few general housekeeping rules. So you are automatically muted as an attendee. And if you have any questions, you can always submit those in the Q&A panel. And my colleague Sina will help with the Q&A. And the session is being recorded and it also will be shared in the next couple of days via email or other communication channels. So in terms of the lineup today, we have 3 speakers from around the world. We have esteemed speaker, Mr. Sanjay Rodriguez, who is the commissioner of the city of Panaji in India. And thank you very much, Commissioner, for being with us here today. And the second speaker is Mr. Juan David Palacio, who is the director of the Metropolitan Region of Aburrá Valley, the short form AMVA in Colombia. So due to time difference and also schedule conflicts, Juan unfortunately can't be present, but a pre-recorded video will show you how urban freight is managed in the metropolitan region. And our next speaker is Camilo Urbano, the leader of urban planning at Despacio, which is a research center and nonprofit organization with projects in more than 20 cities and Latin American countries. So a very warm welcome to Camilo and also to the 3 speakers. So just in terms of today's agenda, we will have the official launch of the Ecologists report, and then we will have 3 different regions. And following this, we will have a Q&A session with the audience. So just in general, for those who are not familiar with ICLEI, ICLEI is a global network of more than 1,750 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. And the ICLEI is active in more than 100 countries, and we have 23 offices worldwide. So when we talk about ecologistics, I think all of you who are present here have been working in the space of freight transport and are very much aware of the increasing freight transport and its associated emissions. So just in terms of urban freight, it represents up to 25% of traffic in European cities and takes up 40% of motorized road space, and also is responsible for air pollution. So for our cities, as they continue to grow, increasing freight movement presents a lot of challenges related to air pollution, emission, congestion, and of course, more importantly, it's also about the quality of life of the residents. So that's why understanding the fabrics of and flows of urban freight is very important to understand how the socioeconomic system of a city work basically. And that's why at ICLEI, we are actually putting a lot of emphasis on ecologistics. And then the Ecologists Project, which is supported by the German Federal Ministry, BNU, through the International Climate Initiative. So this project aims to increase the capacity of key actors in the sector and to build strategies and policies to promote low carbon and sustainable urban freight in 3 countries, which are Argentina, Colombia, and India. So we work also together with the partners, as you can Zaragoza Logistics Center, Despacio. Camilo will also be representing Despacio later in the session, and also Smart Freight Center. And I can also see like some colleagues from Smart Freight Center are also joining us today. So under this framework, we are very excited to announce the launch of this report, Creating Livable Cities Through Low Carbon Freight, Ecologistics in Argentina, Colombia, and India. So you can see the link here, and in the next couple of minutes, I will guide you through the report's key message and the data. And we, of course, also invite you to browse the page to find out how urban freight data can help our project cities evaluate and make science-based decisions. So just in general, we know that the freight sector is full of complexity, and there are so many stakeholders involved, which include shippers, couriers, and forwarders, etc. And the thing is, when it comes to urban freight data, often the most comprehensive data available, they are aligned with the private sector. And when it comes to the city planners and also transport experts who work in the cities, they often lack comprehensive understanding or data or common terminologies or tools to manage urban freight. So in comparison with the passenger transport. And the thing is, with climate change disclosure more or less becoming a norm, tracking emissions in these cities still remains a very big challenge. And the cities, when they set the strategies to decarbonize transport, and in particular freight transport, it is important or essential for them to include the emissions from urban freight transport into climate commitments, and also to understand the emission contributions. And that's why against this background, we ICLEI developed the Ecologists Self-monitoring Tool together with our partners, Ecologists Center, Smart Freight Center, and also Dispatcher. So the tool is a free Excel-based tool for local governments to estimate, evaluate, and also track the urban freight performance. By using the tool, we actually provided a baseline measurement of urban freight emissions in the 9 project cities. So what I'm going to present later, the analysis in the report, is a result of extensive dashboard research and also multi-stakeholder discussions, close consultations with public officials in the city, and of course, surveys and interviews with the logistics companies and freight operators. And I think on that front, my colleague Camilo will give you a very comprehensive view later on how the data collection is done and the methodology behind it. And of course, in each of the city, the quality and availability of data varies, but city-specific data was used wherever available in our report. So the following slides actually provide a very sneak peek of the figures and statistics from these 9 project cities and regions. So just in general, a wide range of parameters actually provided, covering like a demographic, socioeconomic, infrastructure, and also freight transport specific data. For instance, related to vehicle age and also fuel type or capacity utilization, fuel consumption, etc. So this is more or less an overview. In these 9 cities, an aggregate number shows that more than 40 million tons of GHG emissions have been reported by the cities. And then we also take a look at the inventory of the vehicle fleet in general. So it seems that more than 5.8 million vehicles are registered in the cities, and out of them, we contacted through our regional offices, contact also local consultants to conduct surveys and also interviews with the companies and acquire information about more than 13,000 freight vehicles in this sample. So by estimating their vehicle activity and fuel use data collected from these surveys, we estimate the baseline emissions from the sample. And then you can see there are more than 313,000 tons of baseline emissions were aggregated based on the city's samples. So if we continue business as usual scenario, the tool also estimates the baseline emission as well as the projections toward 2025, 2030, and also 2050 in the BAU scenario, which means no additional interventions are taken. So as you can see, the emissions will grow drastically in all these cities. And if we have a close look at the baseline emissions by fuel type, actually over 80% of the emissions comes from diesel fueled vehicles. And you can see in this slide, basically in each city, the majority of the emissions come from the diesel powered vehicles. And then another look at the emissions by vehicle type, we can also see that the majority of emissions actually come from the heavier vehicles, for instance, rigid trucks or trucks and trailers. And especially in Bogotá and Rosario, these vehicles contribute to more than 60% of the freight emissions because they actually play an important role in transporting goods in the area with like industrial activity and also over long distance. So the emission chart shows basically the emissions are increasing rapidly and cities need to change that situation. So how do we do that? By understanding the challenges related to urban freight, we can probably understand a little bit more about which intervention points are most impactful and which should be adopted by the cities, even though each city has its own context and characteristics when it comes to urban freight. But in general, just in terms of the key findings from these 9 project cities, it seems like air quality and emission reduction, they are one of the key drivers for sustainable urban freight in these cities. And for instance, you will know a bit more later in AMVA's video. Actually, AMVA has been doing a lot to combat air pollution and with a strong focus dealing with freight vehicle fleet in the region. And second observation is like in high quality infrastructure is actually a precondition for both passenger and freight movements, but often the infrastructure capacity consumed by freight activities is overlooked by the cities. And then when it comes to the fuel consumption, actually many cities, of course, they realize the importance of reducing fuel consumption and also emissions from the sector. However, there's a lack of data on real world vehicles that can be used to establish a baseline, which can then be further used to track the performance and then to identify the most important area for improvements. And on top of that, so irrespective of city scale or location, whether it's in India or it's in Argentina or Colombia, actually the urban freight interventions have a quite similar profile. So they're often piecemeal, they're often place-based and project-based, and they are limited to a certain group of stakeholders. And then last but not least, the national vision on sustainable freight stimulates local change. However, there's uneven distribution actually of efforts among countries, even within the project countries. So with that, taking that into account, how do we reverse this trend? How do we reduce the emissions of the urban freight sector? In this report, we summarize a few policy recommendations for the city leaders to basically nudge them to move towards sustainable urban freight and to reduce emissions from this sector. And to start with, we have a combination of measures that cities should take. So it's carrot and stick. And we also, so that basically means like policymakers need to adopt and also implement a portfolio of carrots and sticks to drive the decarbonization of freight transport. And based actually on the knowledge and experience gained through these project cities, a coherent and comprehensive package of mutually reinforcing measures that are tailored to the city's context is important. And also for cities to engage the wider stakeholder group to regulate the urban freight sector. And second point would be like integrating passenger and freight transport. And especially I think more and more cities, they are making announcements on zero emission vehicles and zero emission zones. So the momentum to push for freight to be included in transportation is now. And there should be, of course, a holistic approach to do that. And the third one we want to highlight here is working collaboratively across regions and industries, because often there are silos between different stakeholders and there's a lack of shared vision. So, but by bringing multi-stakeholders onto the same table, it can be ensured that they can be heard and their advices can be taken into account. And then especially when it comes to policy making, public consultation is important. So the last point that we want to make is about data. So now new technology offers the opportunity for the cities to collect data actually at a relatively low cost, but then still a stronger collaboration should still be fostered between the public sector and also the private companies to mitigate the data availability issue. And apart from that, methodologies for logistic emission calculating, such as the tool that I just introduced in the beginning, should also be used. And I think with that, Camilo from Dispatcher will also introduce to you a bit more about how data is supporting the decision making. So just a closer look at the recommendations. For instance, when it comes to a combination of the measures, we actually in the report also listed a range of existing actions that are implemented or undertaken by the city, by the project cities to address urban freight issues, and it can be classified into 8 main groups, whether it's about infrastructure, parking, loading, or vehicle-related strategies, and freight demand, land use management, and also stakeholder engagement, etc. So I would also encourage you to look at the report and see which city is doing exactly what, so that you can have a better view and see if it can be also deployed in other cities and what are the experiences and takeaways from our project cities. And then, of course, for instance, when it comes to just an example in terms of integrating freight into mobility planning in general, like the in the Kochi city in India, they actually set up a special purpose vehicle, which is named the Kerala Freight Port Limited. So this organization will be in charge of implementing and also overseeing all projects related to freight. And as such, I get there is a holistic approach taken by the city. Yeah, and then of course, like I mentioned, like multi-stakeholders, as you can see in the graph, there's a wide range of them, and then it's important to align their vision and also to engage them upfront in your project implementation. And last but not least, here is also an example of what Bogotá has done to make the urban freight data available. And also this picture actually presents Bogotá's freight corridors and records the traffic volumes from each corridor. And based on this, how Bogotá is implementing their projects or to manage the traffic flow in the city. So that being said, I encourage you again to access the web link and also to download the report, and also, of course, to share it widely with your peers and the network. And for the next 40 minutes, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my colleagues here. First, I will like to invite the Commissioner of Panaji, Mr. Sanjay Rodriguez, the Commissioner of the City of Panaji, to the stage, and we could have a closer look at the sustainable urban freight approaches interventions that are rolled out in Panaji. So Commissioner, thanks for joining us, and then you can start sharing your screen if you want.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me and my city's views here. I hope I can. I have shared the screen and it is visible now. Yeah. Okay. So a little about our city. You know, if you see our statistics there, we are We are strong in tourism, and because of our strong nature of tourism, both foreign and domestic tourists, and the increase which we have tabulated, 66% increase in foreign tourists, 126% increase in domestic tourists. We have naturally a progressive rise in logistic movements across the city, because tourism has a lot of potential to bring people, and with people come all services, and hence a huge load on the city because of freight moving in and out, especially hotels, tourist points, restaurants, pubs, beach fronts, a huge load of logistics and freight moving across the city. What did we do? Why go into ecologistics, and why did Panjim take up this project of ecologistics? We had no data. We had absolutely no information on what to do, how to go about, but we could see the freight load increasing, transport figures increasing, roads getting crowded. But for understanding the freight movement, we had very little information and understanding about this urban freight. So in the absence of this, this data, and most of our freight movement was in informal sector, so there was no proper data available. Hence, we got very deep into this project of ecologistics so that we could map our this logistics sector properly and know what exactly and how exactly the city should react to it. So we had the process whereby we wanted to have our baseline fixed, and we wanted to see how we could work towards a low carbon urban freight system for our city. We formed a multi-stakeholder committee, and we had the trade chamber there, we had the Travel and Tourism Association there, transporters, then we had warehousing people. All this, these people met together, discussed, and we then got some suggestions and some baseline data for formation of our strategy. So our strategy itself, then we worked on a short-term immediate strategy where we could make a difference quickly and the city could see this, this benefit, a medium-term, and then a long-term strategy. So after all these discussions, stakeholder movements, gap analysis, and incorporating the suggestions, we worked on this low carbon freight action plan. We have forward logistics where, as we said, because of our market yards, tourism, and hotels and restaurants, pubs, we have logistics which top the chart in terms of vegetables, fruits, food grains, FMCG, and alcohol. So these are main movements within the city, and a lot of traffic enters the city, especially because of its market scenario as well as the beachfront scenario where these items are required. Then we have a lot of waste coming out of the city because of these restaurants, because of these hotels, guest houses, beach cleaning. A lot of municipal solid waste moves out of the city, sewage trucks, where there are certain areas where we do not have pumping stations. So that movement happens. And one of the things which we are proud of is this: we are a zero waste, landfill free city. So we recycle almost 70% of our dry waste. We compost all our wet waste, and we co-process in a cement incinerator our non-recyclable fraction of plastic waste. So most of this waste has to move out because we do not have a landfill, and the city is committed to not having a landfill, which gives rise to reverse logistics in our city, where most of our waste generated in the city is segregated in 16 fractions and then moves out to various recyclers and recycling companies. So that has also been mapped, and this reverse logistics have been tabulated. We also wanted to see what vehicles and which are the top vehicles which move for freight. So we have seen that light commercial vehicles and small vehicles like vans, three-wheeler, tuk-tuks, rickshaws, tempos, these are used more frequently, and almost a large number of these vehicles have occupied the freight sector here. Another thing is city is full of two-wheelers. A lot of transport and freight, especially companies like online companies, distribution companies work on two-wheelers today. So a lot of two-wheelers are used for moving freight across the city. So we have mapped this from where they come, how they go, and where exactly these are situated. This is a typical example of how fruits and vegetables move within the city. The heavy vehicles come with fruits and vegetables, then there is unloading. The market is being then serviced with smaller vehicles and rickshaws, and all shops, restaurants and establishments then also get through small vehicles. So the whole tabulation is done. This is just one example, and we have listed a lot of such fractions of freight, wherein we have mapped how these fractions move into the city and out of the city, if at all it moves out. So the goods flow system within the city has been mapped totally. So we have a complete idea of which vehicles, if we want to replace and go for electric vehicles, which are the ones which will give us more benefit, how they will help us, which are the vehicles which emanate more GHGs. All this has been possible, and data is available now because of mapping of these freight fractions. This is how hot zones of freight move. So you can see along the waterfront, the main CBD area of our city, where the major tourist attractions and major hub of tourist activity goes around. So a lot of freight enters into this area, and we have mapped major freight hotspots, minor freight hotspots, loading and unloading hotspots, markets, as well as godowns and warehouses. So all these nodes indicate this movement hotspots, and we have then created this freight comparison map for our city. So how did we get to this? How did we know? Of course, it was very difficult because many stakeholders were wary of why we want this data, why we wanted to investigate so much into their affairs and details. But we had a long and winding stakeholder consultation process so that we got good data, solid data, and authentic data, so that our city map, the freight map, was well done. So private stakeholders, government stakeholders, NGOs, certain associations, clubs, all the stakeholders were brought together, and we had the stakeholder assessment mapped. Then we have emissions. After getting all these things, we wanted to know what are the emissions generated by this freight. One of our main areas is reduction of emissions. Of course, we have worked a lot in our waste sector to reduce emissions. We wanted to now map emissions coming out of our freight movement. So we have now mapped emissions coming out of each type of vehicles. So you can see a majority of emissions, almost 77 tons of GHG comes out from light commercial vehicles. Then the small vehicles give around 5 tons, 39 point, almost 40 tons. So we have mapped the emission strategy, emission quantum per vehicle or a group of vehicles which move throughout the city. And we have almost 125 tons of GHG emissions per day on these large vehicles. Causes of emissions also are there, because we have seen a lot of freight movement get stuck in the city because of timings. They enter the city during the wrong time. They move out of the city during the wrong time. So one of the main aspects is parking. There is wrong parking, no parking, inadequate parking. So freight vehicles keep moving around the city, increasing congestion time, increasing idling time, and making the entire supply chain inefficient. So this is a big gap we have in our city, which has been mapped. So we are trying to work on these parking zones where we could immediately get us parking, and a vehicle could come into the city with a reserved parking, so that there is congestion time, obstruction time, and efficiency increases, thereby reducing the GHG emissions. Most of our movement is on roads during peak hours sometimes, so that is being worked upon. But every bottleneck which increases this GHG emission has been mapped, and the improvement has been chalked out, and a report on the improvement strategies for Panjim is going to be worked out. Lastly, we have mapped for the city what strategies we will work out, and a report is coming out on this. So road safety, these are the topics: e-commerce, urban economy, resilient supply chain, cost reduction. One of the important things is optimization of last mile logistics, which takes a lot of our transport space. Last mile logistics is what we are working on very strongly, to draw a corridor for this last mile logistics, do timings, work on EV stations and EV vehicles for this last mile logistics. And lastly, an integrated urban mobility plan where we reduce conflict between our urban transport as well as urban transport versus goods vehicles. So this is in a nutshell what we have strategized for Panjim, and through this campaign. I would like to stop here. Many speakers are to follow. A lot of other countries like Colombia, Argentina, we would also like to hear them. Thank you very much for having us here. And before I end, a warm welcome to Panjim for anyone and everyone on this show, on this seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rodriguez, and thank you very much for joining us. And at the same time, yeah, like Commissioner has mentioned, like I can see that in Panji, a lot has been done in the space of urban freight, whether it's about stakeholder engagement or setting up a baseline in the cities, or it's about developing the low carbon action plan that is still ongoing. So without further ado, like Commissioner also mentioned, we have a good lineup of speakers. So I would like to actually present the video of the metropolitan area of Aburrá Valley. And then, yeah, like I said earlier, the director couldn't be here, but then I will show the video of AMVA so that the audience could also know what it looks like in AMVA in terms of urban freight management. So I hope you can see now the video. Yes, and the subtitles. So I think it's also good if we have a taste of a different language here.
Soy Juan David Palacio Cardona, director del área metropolitana del Valle de Aburrá. En el ejercicio de nuestra actividad como director, nosotros tenemos contemplado el Consejo Metropolitano de Movilidad, Allí logramos reunir todos los actores asociados al transporte, tanto público como privado, donde se representan los intereses y también problemáticas de la región. Este es un espacio en el cual hay un entendimiento entre todos los actores precisamente para diagnosticar las dificultades que se tienen en nuestro territorio y además también para encontrar soluciones sobre estas problemáticas. Una de las principales dificultades que tenemos es un área metropolitana con un número importante de automotores, cerca de 1.750.000 vehículos que inciden en el ciclo de conducción y que también alteran la logística y el ejercicio del transporte de carga. Nuestro territorio lo divide el río Medellín, un río que cruza desde el sur hacia el norte y que este corredor es estratégico para la carga. Es de esta forma que se viene trabajando con un diagnóstico y asociado con diferentes actores como la Alianza Logística, principalmente para diseñar un corredor estratégico que tenga un carril exclusivo para el transporte de carga. Esta es información que se logra recolectar tanto con los transportadores, con el ejercicio logístico y con la ciudadanía en función de mejorar las condiciones del territorio metropolitano, en función también de mejorar la calidad del aire de nuestro Valle de Aburrá y en función de generar competitividad para nuestro Valle de Aburrá. El área metropolitana del Valle de Aburrá como entidad logra reunir los 10 municipios que integran este territorio, municipios que cuentan con alcaldías, con consejos y con competencias desde diferentes puntos de vista desde lo administrativo. En ese ejercicio, esta entidad reúne en un espacio la sana discusión y construcción de políticas públicas. Es de esta forma y en un ejercicio de gobernanza que hemos logrado articular la Alianza Logística Regional, un espacio en el cual participa activamente el Ministerio de Transporte y todas las secretarías de movilidad y los actores del transporte de carga, precisamente para discutir las problemáticas en el ejercicio logístico y de transporte de nuestra región metropolitana. Es de esta forma que el área metropolitana representa ese acompañamiento, pero además a través de los diversos memorandos de entendimiento, como logramos consolidar el año pasado con Bancolombia Leasing, promoviendo la comercialización, venta y utilización de vehículos eléctricos para el transporte de carga. En otro sentido, también hemos acompañado la generación de espacios para acompañar el transporte de carga, principalmente con un distintivo vehicular para aquellos automotores que generan un número importante de contaminantes como es el PM2.5, los hemos identificado con el propósito de señalar cuáles de estos vehículos generan menos emisiones para aquellos eventos en los cuales tengamos que tomar medidas restrictivas puedan estar exonerados. Ese es el ejercicio de esta entidad como actor articulador, como partícipe de la gobernanza, pero principalmente como autoridad en materia ambiental. Nuestra preocupación es brindar calidad de vida para los ciudadanos, pero también acompañar el ejercicio logístico y competitividad en nuestro territorio. Todas las problemáticas que se generan en torno al transporte de carga y el ejercicio logístico se traducen en dificultades económicas o sobrecostos en la operación. En ese sentido, nosotros identificamos la necesidad de unir todos los actores para elaborar diagnósticos, pero también para buscar fuentes de apalancamiento. Es una realidad, no podemos satanizar el ejercicio de transporte de carga. Sabemos que muchos de estos automotores generan contaminantes que además generan dificultades en la movilidad de nuestro territorio metropolitano, pero tenemos que hacer una transformación. Y esa transformación se logra bajo un ejercicio de gobernanza, un ejercicio en el cual participa las entidades públicas como son las alcaldías municipales, el gobierno nacional a través de la Alianza Logística Regional y nosotros como autoridad ambiental en lo urbano, pero también como actores planificadores del territorio. Es allí que hemos logrado diagnosticar diferentes posibilidades de fuente de financiación, como puede ser una tasa compensada a través de una entidad del gobierno nacional que tiene como propósito acompañar el ejercicio de la renovación del parque automotor. Esto depende no solo del ejercicio público, depende también de la voluntad de los actores privados y de los propietarios de los vehículos. Se logra demostrar en un ejercicio financiero que cuando los vehículos son más nuevos, menos niveles de mantenimiento se tienen que realizar y esto se representa en mayores niveles de utilidad a corto plazo. Estas son las mesas de trabajo que se tienen donde se logra demostrar la gobernanza, el trabajo articulado, el involucramiento de la ciudadanía y de los actores, precisamente demostrando los elementos económicos que pueden representar a corto y largo plazo con transformación de tecnología. Mediante acuerdo metropolitano, durante el año 2020 logramos aprobar el Plan Maestro de Movilidad, una política pública que se traza hasta el año 2030 con el propósito de establecer cuál debe ser la ruta de trabajo en materia de transporte de nuestro territorio metropolitano. Allí abordamos, por ejemplo, la necesidad que la ciudadanía se enamore más del uso del transporte público y este se convierta en la columna vertebral de la movilidad de nuestro territorio metropolitano. Y esto tiene como propósito disminuir el número de automotores que ruedan y facilitar el ejercicio logístico y el transporte de carga, generar menos tiempos en sus recorridos. De esta forma somos más efectivos por el cuidado de la calidad del aire, pero además también facilitamos el ejercicio logístico. Contamos con un corredor cercano a los 27 kilómetros de norte a sur, corredor que se demora en un día promedio cerca de 2 horas en cruzarse. Mediante este plan maestro de movilidad garantizaríamos que al menos no se incrementen los niveles de tiempo, teniendo presente que cada día llegan más automotores, que en nuestro Valle de Aburrá actualmente circulan cerca de 1.750.000 vehículos y motocicletas y demás que alteran todo el ejercicio logístico de nuestro territorio metropolitano. Nuestra entidad siempre ha contado con el ejercicio y acompañamiento de ICLEI, red a la cual pertenecemos, y agradecemos por hacernos partícipes de todo su ejercicio logístico, académico, técnico, pero también por vincularnos al proyecto Ecologistics.
Right. So I think just to recap a little bit, so AMVA is the second most populous metropolitan area in Colombia, and it is composed of 10 municipalities, with Medellin being the second most important and also largest city in the country after Bogotá. And of course, in the video, you can see there's a lot of information. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is that AMVA has put a lot of focus on freight transport, and also by bringing the stakeholders together from these 10 municipalities, and also to integrate freight into the sustainable mobility planning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, Camilo Urbano. So Camilo is the leader of urban planning at Despacho, which is a research center at a nonprofit organization. And Camilo has been working for more than 13 years in project management, as well as urban planning and also public transport. And also before joining Despacho, Camilo worked as a consultant also for the World Bank and also Bogotá Secretary of Mobility and the City Council of Bogotá, etc., among other positions. So we are very happy to have you here, Camilo. Now you can share your screen.
Thank you, Ichen. I'm very happy to be in here in this panel with all the distinguished members. So I wanted to present the data challenges and opportunities that we face here in the data collection for ecologists in the past 2 years. Also the learnings that we acquired in this process with all the members of the project, with Zaragoza Logistics Center and Smart Freight Center. So basically, I'm going to focus in these challenges, the opportunities, the strategies and actions and methodology that we use to build this baseline that we have right now, and focus on the key results, some of them that were mentioned by Ichen before, and 3 specific learnings to improve the decision and policy making based on this data that we collect so far. So first of all, what is related in the challenges that we face is that urban freight transportation and GHG data wasn't not relevant at the beginning of this project. It was not a priority in the policy agenda of the local governments. There was a focus on other issues like public transportation and air quality, but in the past 2 years, we started to gain more space and more attention, not even for the different emergencies that the cities face, but also of the quality of the projects that the ecologists set, and the working with all these local governments and the different stakeholders that are involved. Second, data is mainly in the private sector, especially here in Latin America. All companies have little incentives to share the data, and they had information are spread in the different levels that they are composed. Especially the most information are in the drivers and the operative actors that develop freight transportations, and that leads us to 2 other challenges. Not only the complexity to have very good data, because I said before, but also to the mistrust to sharing the information. One of the challenges that we faced in these years was that they gained the trust of the companies because they thought that sharing the information, it would be harder the regulation for the local governments, or even that we could sell the information to competitors or even burger guns and everything that would put in jeopardize their security. And finally, at the end of the data collection campaign, we faced COVID-19. So it was also difficult to capture the attention of the companies in order to give us the information. Because the company was focused to addressing the emergencies and the quarantine setbacks in the different cities. So we had to deal with these challenges and sometimes difficulties and turn around to make it opportunities. So the first thing it was to close the gaps of the information on urban freight and GHG emissions. So one thing is that the governments, especially the small cities like Santa Fe and Córdoba and Manizales, they saw the opportunity to have their information about GHG emission and also urban freight. And creating incentives and awareness, especially with the public parties and the private parties, in order that they can open the information. So the pilot project's idea that ICLEI and Ecologists is going to endorse in the coming in this year, it opened the mind to the companies to give us information and create awareness of how the utility of these projects it could be had. Third opportunity that we can highlight here is the first step that to set a methodology and standards for urban freight and data collection. Now also to define GHG emissions here in Latin America. That's not part of a project here in the region. And we started to define this methodology in urban freight because this kind of project is not in something similar here, especially in smaller cities. Fourth is building trust with data. So one of the main highlights of the Ecologists Project is to build a low carbon action plan and focus in the working groups that it brings together in the same table public parties and private parties. So building the trust with data that they are collecting and building together is in order to set the low carbon action and the future action based on that. COVID-19 also helps us to speed up this process to obtain better information, the awareness of the utility to have this information to find policy in the long term. So what we did in order to deal with these strategies and even difficulties and opportunities is we find I want to highlight 6 main strategies in action. First of all, we identify the potential companies that were relevant in the business and industries. Also, we mapping the areas in the company, the national logistics carriers, operators, in order to bring them together in every city. We are talking about 6 cities, so it was very huge, important task. And we do it together with ICLEI network and all the partners of the project. Third, we contact the working group, especially guilds, because around together there will be trust in order to collect the information, to share the information, to open the data. Fourth, we develop some incentives in order to capture the interest of the companies and especially the governments to create this awareness, or also to define and to respond the service that we designed to collect the information. And 5 and 6 strategy that we use is that low carbon action plans to define this long-term action with the private parties and the public parties, give us the chance to increase the visibility of the companies, to be part of them, to define long-term process actions, but also to define the opportunity to reshape the policies and to identify pilot projects in order that they give us the interest that they be involved. So our methodology to collect information was it was 3 main steps. First of all, we mapping the companies in their locations and freight trips, where the generation and attraction on the companies attract more trips, freight trips, especially in the CBD areas of the cities. This is a picture of Santa Fe, where we collect most of the information of the city, but we did the same in the other 5 cities of the project. Second, we developed together with the ecologists and the partners a survey, but we did in 4 different methods: phone calls, email, personal interviews on-site, and online service. And finally, with all this information that we collect, we review the data, we clear it, and we estimate the GHG emission using the Ecologists tool that Etienne mentioned before. So I wanted to highlight 3 main results that we have, and you can find in the report. Please download it at the end of this presentation and this panel. It's very interesting. I have a lot of information. I wanted to highlight that the share base of CO2 emissions of the fuel type, Etienne mentioned before this, but I wanted to highlight something very interesting. Here in Latin America, but this fuel is the fuel that is the base on the power up of the most of the vehicles. But in AMVA and Manizales, they use the focus, or they use in gasoline the power out the vehicles. In Bogotá, the smaller vehicles below 3 tons gross vehicle weight, they started to use gas, so compressed natural gas. This is a very interesting thing because it's reduced the emissions factor, but it was also something that started with the newer vehicles that we have. Second aspect that I wanted to highlight, and Etienne mentioned before, in cities that has a lot industrial activity and freight activity, like Bogotá, Córdoba, and Rosario in Argentina, Bogotá in Colombia, vehicles has more than 20 years and have a 20 tons gross vehicle weight. This is the bigger trucks. They are the ones who produce most emissions in the cities. But in small cities like Manizales and Santa Fe in Argentina, Manizales in Colombia, middle-sized vehicles between 3.5 tons and 20 tons, they're the ones who produce most emissions in the cities. In Medellin, this metropolitan area, the smaller vehicles below 3.5 tons, the emissions are produced mostly but these small vehicles because they develop more intra-city trips. So 80% of the trips are developed by these smaller vehicles. And then I wanted to highlight something that Etienne mentions at the beginning of this panel. The Ecologists tool help us to set a business as usual scenario in order to forecast how will be the emissions in the next 20 and 30 years. If the cities, no cities, develop any actions at all in the future, there will be an amount increase in GHG emissions, especially in Bogotá. In 10 years, it will be almost 38%, and 20 and 30 years, it will be 150%. And in Córdoba, that is also one of the second most important city in Argentina that produce the most industry activities. In 10 years, it's going to be 43%, and 30 years, it's going to be 174%. What I wanted to highlight here is that if the governments have not put actions right now, this increase in the GHG emissions is going to be huge. But one thing that we are proved in Ecologists Project, and is also in the report, that cost-efficient measures like off-hour deliveries and eco-driving can potentially debate this business and as usual scenario of emissions, and can reduce significantly these emissions. You can find more of the analysis of this in the report, but I wanted to highlight this. I wanted to close my presentation with 3 main learnings that we have, and I think it collects all the things that all the previous panel and participants said. First, Ecologists baseline help us to define a policy agenda, to open the mind of the government officials, to perform activities and to define better priorities and future directions on the sector. Also, as a second, we can allocate more better resources also in GHG reductions, especially in vehicle performance improvement, cost reductions, noise pollution, traffic congestion, and even changing the fuel, the component of the percentage. This is something that we can do and the cities can do very rapidly. Finally, it's something that we, as a reflection in all the things that we have here, is that we have all stakeholders together, public and private parties in the same time. So we can ensure to collaborate the process in order not to collect information, to open the data, but define policy in the long term that will be beneficial for everyone else. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Camilo. Oh, wait, let me share my screen again. Yeah, so as we are running a little bit out of time, so I will just have some very short panel discussion with the Commission and with Camilo. And of course, to all the attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to just drop them in the Q&A, or we can also unmute you if you have any questions. Actually, I have before we address any questions from the audience, I actually have very curious actually when, for instance, Camilo, you mentioned that in your communication with the private stakeholders, actually the pandemic speed up the process. So I just wonder also, like, how has COVID-19 actually played a role in the whole like a communication with the stakeholders and also in urban freight in general?
Here in Colombia, it was like something that it was not expected, that everyone it wasn't not prepared. Especially logistics sector put a lot of pressure to develop better and faster actions. And here in Colombia, actually, they had to start to rethink more of the processes, to think more, to also in terms of data, they had to digitalize because it was analog, it was often something in paper, but also the idea of this working is to manage all the biosecurity protocols, also put more effort. And that was at the beginning, but right now here in the last months, the information also came better. Also, it was a more responsible response for the freight carriers. So here in Colombia, also in Argentina, was a huge task. Also in Argentina, focus in how to address these quarantine setbacks, because the regulations still were very hard, especially with the business and commerce, how to the supply chains to fulfill all the demands. So also they put some attention in how the business had to be on flood, but also the terms and reduction actions of CO2 emissions become the second aspect. But we tried here with ICLEI, try to put that again in the agenda, because this is the crucial point. If we forget this kind of actions, we are not going back. So we tried that yes, it's important to address the setbacks of the COVID-19, but also not forget that this environmental and climate change agenda, that it will be very important.
Thank you very much. I can see that in the Q&A, there are two questions. I think I might ask Commissioner Rodriguez for the first question. So someone asked, according to the different stakeholders, which strategies seem the most appealing in each of the cities and why? Probably in Panaji, may I ask the Commissioner, like, which strategies seem the most appealing? Because you need to let's say, align the needs of different stakeholders, because, and also in the beginning, in your presentation, you mentioned you try to bring the operators, the forwarders, the people who are working in the informal transport, etc., to come together to the table. And I wonder if there are any experiences that you can share with the audience. Okay, Commissioner? Okay, I think there might be some internet issues, but probably I can also ask this question to Camilo. Camilo, in your view, like in your various communication let's say, attempts and also channels with the stakeholders. Which strategies do you think that seem most appealing in Latin America?
It's different in every country. This is a challenge actually. We work with very good consultants in the cities. One of them I say is present here, Juan Pablo Matiz and Carolina Salamanca from Metrica. They help us to contact with the guilds. I guess the guilds were a very good in channel of communication in order to acquire information there. Also, we work with Rodolfo Fiadón in Argentina, and it was a very interesting strategy because we go there to the not only with the guilds but also with the smaller companies. Because one thing that I said for is try to build trust. If we don't build trust with the channel that the companies, especially the governments, are familiarized, they don't give you any kind of information. So guilds was also the smaller companies, when you don't have any kind of interaction at all, you had to go there and try to be more appealing about this idea of this project and bring them together, because smaller companies, they don't focus on that. They don't aware of this kind of project, and they're focusing on everyday activities. So what we try to challenge with the consultants and here in the space is how to contact better, to provide some kind of incentives, perhaps giving more information, be part of webinars, be part of a network, be part of the defining a low carbon action plan in the future. And that was something appealing for them, and they help us to open more information.
Yeah. And I think I can add a little bit more on the Indian context. I think it's also important to communicate with them related to the co-benefits of managing urban freight, basically. I think the commissioner earlier also mentioned, for instance, in Panaji, parking is a big problem and also traffic congestion. So if you can talk about the benefits of managing urban freight that will bring additional benefits related to parking or solving congestion and managing traffic flows, etc. I think that there will be actually very, that would be a selling point actually to talk to the stakeholders. Yeah, and I think there's another question about the emission estimation. It's about, so I think Ivan asked what method was used to estimate the future emissions. Is it a function of GDP growth? So I was working together with our partner, Zaragoza Logistics Center, Smart Freight Center, of course, and also Despacho to work on the tool development, the Ecologists Ecologists Self-monitoring Tool. So just in terms of the projections, it's mainly based on the GDP growth, but we also take into account like different country contexts. So as usually the cities don't have such estimates themselves, so we take the estimates made by the International Transport Forum. So for instance, for Colombia and Argentina, 3% and 3.2% freight growth rate is taken into account, while in the Indian context, the estimated freight demand growth rate is around 6%. So we use that data also to feed into our tool and then to estimate the growth. Yeah. And then as we are running a little bit out of time, okay, I have another question from Laura, and she asked, so she wants to do an assessment of the GHG emissions of the last mile sector of the city. Could you recommend a program or a particular methodology to achieve this task? And she has data about vehicle models, number of the operating daily and mean KN daily driven. I think again, this is related to the tool, so probably I can also address it. So the thing is, currently the tool that we developed is mainly based on, is used to estimate the citywide emission emissions in general. Of course, we are also testing it out, for instance, for the implementation of pilot projects in our cities. And then we also want to choose a site, and then in that site, we see how to feed the data into the tool and then to estimate. So basically, it's also, in general, the emission accounting can be grouped into field-based approach and activity-based approach. For field-based approach, we take into account fuel consumption, and that is usually provided by the city or the relevant stakeholders. And then by the activity-based, we take into account the ton kilometer and also, the payload and also the efficiency, etc. So that's what you can use with the Ecologists Self-monitoring Tool. And if you want also further information, of course, you can also reach out to us, and then we will provide you with that. So we are, as we are running a bit of time, I just want to, with that, everything we have discussed in mind, I want to thank, of course, Commissioner Rodriguez from Panaji, and also Juan Palacio from AMVA, and also Camilo Urbano from Dispatcho for sharing your experiences, and all of the attendees for attending and engaging with us in the discussions. And there's actually, for our next session, it's happening at 3:30, and it will also highlight the challenges and opportunities in last mile deliveries. And then you will also have a great panel with the city of Bogotá, the city of Rosario, and also Tumi, who is the head of sustainable mobility at ICLEI World Secretariat. And with that being said, I want to give the floor back to Mike. Mike.
Great. Thank you very much, Yichen. I'd like to just echo your thanks to the speakers, and really fascinating to hear it, and very interesting to hear about the project. And of course, we could fill a whole afternoon or more even with this discussion. But I think excellent, you've launched it. Now we have the chance to look and to come back to you with ideas and questions and so on. Also, really good to see research being put into practice. And then how do we scale it up? And you started to touch on that when Camilo said it's difficult when things are different in different places. And I'm sure we will return to that theme. So very inspiring workshop. Great to have you involved in the conference. Thanks again for all that. I've got just two other quick comments to make. The first is, you've really mentioned it already, Yichen. It's quite a tight timetable this afternoon. We don't have very big breaks between the sessions. I guess you don't have to travel, but you still have to probably log in and out and do all kinds of other things. So we realize that it's all a bit tight, but we hope that putting a lot into the day will give a lot of content and a lot of some value to the different things. And the third point I wanted to make is a practical one. We have created a space on the conference website where we can update anything that's changing, so we can let you know. So perhaps you could look from time to time at the conference website to check if anything is updated. We don't want to keep sending you emails. We realize that's not always very effective. So please look on a regular basis at the conference website. There will be a little note with some updates. And among the updates is an important link to a questionnaire that's come to us from the London School of Economics on a project they're working on with the OECD. And it's part of a big study which they're looking at, all about how in a post-pandemic world, how will cities address questions of accessibility? And this is not just taking freight into account, but the question of how can government action support cities in a, if you like, a new environment? And I think it's very important to capture the views of freight in this, because freight is a very important topic. We've heard again from people who have to deal with this on a day-to-day basis in cities and plan for it in cities. But as researchers, it's also important we get our views across and our comments on what are important tools to use. And this is a chance to make sure that freight gets counted. Whereas if we don't, in a sense, make an effort to put freight on the map, then it will be become always a little bit ignored in some of the planning. So please take 10 minutes to complete this questionnaire. The link is on the conference webpage, and we'll remind you a couple more times during the rest of the conference. So please have a look at the conference webpage, complete the questionnaire, and let's see if we can get freight treated more seriously at a government level. Cities are taking it increasingly seriously, but we need also national government to be aware that urban freight is critical to the success of the country and the people who are living in some of the cities, big, small, and the ones in between, the medium-sized ones. So thanks, Etienne, for a great session. And now I think we will close and let people get a coffee or a tea or a bedtime drink or whatever, or maybe something to wake up better, because it's now 5 o'clock, I think, in the morning in Colombia, and Camilo's been up for ages already. So thanks again for all the time and effort. Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of the